Hey everyone, so this is Kate Tassi of the podcast Hear Me Roar with Kate Tassi, and formerly of Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. I want to welcome you all back to the podcast and remind everyone that this is the new revamped podcast that has a new website, hearmeroarpodcast.com, and all new social media accounts on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, YouTube, and soon to be new episodes soon to be put up on iTunes and Google Play. The old episodes of Hammer Time are still available on iTunes and Google Play under Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. So I had the great honor of speaking with Angie of Angelina Rose Photography earlier today. I apologize in advance for what you're about to hear of the audio quality. We were kind of in a glass bubble, and so I tried to do my best to reduce the amount of extraneous noises, but you're going to hear some, unfortunately. So I will not allow that mistake to be made again by myself in the future, but please just indulge me this one time. So Angie and Angie's a current business owner, and I am a former business owner. So you're going to hear our wonderful discussion that we had earlier today about being women in business, being younger business owners. And although we are obviously both female and are both on the younger side, when we started our businesses, I really believe that this episode is really relatable and has a lot of great information for anyone that's interested in running their own practice, their own business, even to anyone who's just a business professional. And so I hope you'll enjoy. We did run on a little bit long, a little bit longer than my podcasts usually are. And I attribute that to us not seeing each other for a little while. We can get to catching up a bit, and it can take a few hours. So with that being said, I will be trying to create almost mini episodes or highlights that address specific issues. But in the meantime, I am producing this mega episode that discusses about where we came from, what kind of businesses we ran or are running, as the case may be, what made us decide to open our own business, whether we had any prior knowledge or experience prior to doing so, what it was like for us being females, what it was like for us to be in our mid-20s, whether we had any mentors, what are some of our kind of failures that we experienced, some of our greatest successes, some tips that we had for others, how we feel like we were mentored and had to push past our fears and vulnerabilities in order to make sure that we were doing it in a properly and respectful way, our kind of business models and approaches to business, and a whole lot more. And Angie actually asked me a lot about the criminal justice system. So for anyone who's interested in that, in mental health issues involving the criminal justice system, inequalities in it, racial and socioeconomic disparities, sex offender issues, the whole lot. We really caught up. And so I hope that you'll enjoy this kind of mega episode. I'll be back in a little while with my next episode, which will be a more appropriate and an ingestible length. And as I said, I'll try and cut these down to more sizable and ingestible durations. But until then, please enjoy. And I hope that you'll contact me at any of these social media accounts or the website or my email, hearmeroarpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope that this resonates with at least one or two of you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I can always pass along your questions to Angie. And I am, again, so honored that she joined me today. So without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy episode 2 of the Hear Me Roar podcast about women in business and small business ownership. Thanks. So, as I mentioned, I used to run a law firm. For those of you who are unaware, I am now disabled, but I used to run a criminal defense practice in Rhode Island and Massachusetts called the Law Office of Catherine Godin. And I had no business knowledge or experience prior to opening my practice in 2009. I was so grateful, and I'm sure, Angie, I think we talked about this in a prior conversation, of being grateful of others to kind of mentor you through it, because I had no idea how to run a business. I knew I had skills in trial advocacy and legal research and writing. I felt confident in that, but I did not feel confident about, establishing prices and clients.
Yeah. Never mind even taxes.
I know, exactly. So
the financial aspect, I think, is usually the most difficult.
Yes, and so for me, I don't know why someone didn't warn me of this sooner. Even I won't mention their name, but not to throw my business lawyer under the bus. But I opened my practice November 12th of 2009, and so I was really only in business for 6 weeks in that calendar year, and still had to pay the $500 mandatory minimum tax income for a business.
Ouch.
For the state. Yeah. It was
a little thought on their part about what would best benefit.
A little oversight, but that's okay. But I was excited to get going, and so I wanted to just start up. So why don't you tell the listeners a bit about what made you want to start your photography business?
So I knew that I wanted to start my own business, and my husband actually was really supportive. At the time, I don't think we were married, but we'd been dating for an extraordinarily long time.
Yeah. Shout out to Chris.
Yeah. So he was really helpful in having me. So he's an economics major. I was a biologist.
Oh, that's great.
So he was super helpful in being able to look at the finances and look at the financials of owning certain types of businesses, and really what it would be in terms of like how long of a day, how much money would that make, what's the potential revenue you could do.
Right.
So he was my little business plan.
That's great.
And then I sort of actually, to be honest, sort of stumbled into the photography, and it just merged so well, my artistic creativity as well as my analytical thinking, where it's, the creative mixed with the, compositions, lighting, and so it sort of merged my left and right sides of my brain, and I was like, this is good, and it allows me the freedom that I was looking for and the flexibility if I want it. However, it can also really take over your life at the same time.
Yes.
So you gotta find
that balance. Yes, and I just finished editing my book that I'm going to be submitting to literary agents.
Ooh,
I'm pretty excited about that. In a couple of weeks, I'm gonna send out all the letters.
So fast. I feel like that's fast.
I know. Yeah, it was. It was about a year, but then I think about Jean-Dominique Bourbet. Of the documentary, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and he had a stroke, and he was the editor of French Elle magazine, had a stroke at 44, could only use one eyelid, and blinked.
Oh my God!
Blinked a book in
That's
10
impressive.
months. 10 months. He inspired me so much. That's why I had a diving bell tattooed onto my arm. But anyways, I'm excited about the book. And hopefully that'll come out maybe sometime next year. But in it, I talk about how I didn't have that balance. And I'm so proud of you for, fighting to find that balance, because for the 5 years that I was running my practice, I never took it.
I never took the time to do it. And I think that's something that, to anyone out there who's considering opening their own practice or maybe just starting your own practice, please remember you can be the worst boss in the world to yourself. I think I might have been listening to RuPaul, and he was talking about how it can be hard to be your own boss because
It's the hardest.
yeah, you really like with another with any other job, right?
Yeah.
You report to the job, you work an 8, maybe 10, maybe 12-hour shift, but you go home, you
Yeah.
shut it off, and then it's done. Whereas you're doing it all
Every
the
second
time,
of the day.
every second of every day. There's always more work to be done, but you can never really recognize the shut off button because you're the one responsible for it.
You essentially become your work.
Yes. And my counselor at the end of my 5 years of running the practice, she had me buy a stop button, like one of those actual
Yeah.
machine run red
Clock.
buttons. And I incidentally, Office Max, I thought the buttons that they had said stop, but it said something different. So I went to buy one at Office Max and I realized that it didn't say stop on it. So I actually bought like one of those, I don't know, that probably can stop like an assembly line or a crane or something. But I bought it off Amazon and put one at my desk and put another one at home at my workspace, just to visualize that stopping point. But it didn't work. It didn't work. Which is why I started seeking jobs with the Federal Public Defender's Office. But
well, as we get into this,
yes.
I'd say, why don't you tell me a little bit about the experiences you've had being a female business owner?
Ooh, that's a hard thing with the old boys club of
so
lawyers.
So it's real. You feel
it's real.
Yeah,
it's still there. Do you
I feel like in society, I remember being younger,
Yep.
like when I was definitely in high school or maybe even somewhat in college where I felt like, oh, that's a stigma, it's not real.
Yeah.
And even feminism, I felt
we're
like
past
there's
that
no
time.
need for
Yeah.
that. And it really kind of hits you in the face as you get older and then you really see it.
And you're like, shit, this thing is alive and kicking.
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah, there's a lot of critique out there that post-feminism, post-racial,
Right.
like get the fuck out of here. We're still very much in it, and we, without a doubt, we have it a lot better than our predecessors
Oh my
did.
God, yes.
Without a doubt, hands down, and we are indebted to everyone who came before us. And so, one of my biggest idols is the notorious RBG, if you didn't know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so, I have her book and I watched the documentary a few months ago and I just love everything about her. I love that she knows that Biggie Smalls was from the Bronx, just like she was, or Brooklyn. But anyways, in her book and in her documentary, she was only one of, I want to say like 6 females in Harvard Law School. Yeah, and so the enrollment rate now for law schools around the country, I believe, is just about 50-50. It might be even a little bit more, like 51% female. So the future, # the future is female. It is true, that is very true, but it's still alive and kicking, the old boys club.
What you just touched upon that I almost forgot about is when working a wedding, a few times I had an assistant who's not even shooting or maybe if it was a second photographer that was a male, they were my clients and like I tend to like be front and center to do whatever I need to do. Yeah. And I would have sometimes wedding guests that would go to the other person.
As if he was the main
one. And like if we were standing next to each other, they would just immediately turn to him. And he was younger a lot. Like I've had a few that were definitely younger. So I also thought that was interesting. I felt like sometimes
it's just about
sometimes not being seen, I think.
Yeah. And that's like again, I am very much a feminist. I had a women's studies minor in college. I don't like to be the type of feminist who, again, disparages men, because I feel like that's not really the true definition of feminism, right? It's supposed to be equal opportunities and the equity of the sexes, but it does enrage me when I feel like there's still that sexism there, and it's unspoken, and that's why I want to do this podcast, and why Nikki and I were doing it previously, is that I think the issues need to be addressed. It enrages me when I feel like I'm not being seen or overlooked just because I'm a female. And I had that when I was in Texas as well, because I was doing a presentation in federal court, and there was a certain judicial figure, and of course I'm not going to mention his name, I will just say that it was a male, and I gave the entire presentation myself, was introduced myself, solely me giving the presentation, gave the presentation, did a question and answering section, finished, sat down with a male counterpart and then our male boss. And we, this male counterpart and I, we were relatively new to the Federal Public Defender's Office. And this judge ends up thanking my male counterpart for the presentation.
Wow.
And then emails him afterwards to thank him for the presentation.
Did he say anything in that instance?
Didn't say anything to me, and the male counterpart actually was like, oh, well, I didn't want to offend him, so I didn't say anything. So I was like, okay, so then you just took credit for my presentation. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
As if he created it and I was his puppet, and he was kind of, yeah.
In the email, did he?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Oh well, it's good that he worked so hard on that
really
presentation.
Nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That turned out to be his character, but
Wow.
I digress on that. But I think one thing that we were touching upon a little bit is how it might be a combination of both gender as well as age.
Yes, actually, I
and so
agree.
tell me a bit about what you've experienced there. I feel like, have you ever been kind of dismissed or overlooked because you were seen as being young and assumed to be inexperienced, or?
Yeah, and I actually think that that definitely affected my pricing as well as my confidence. So I think one of the biggest struggles I had in starting was having confidence in general.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not sort of taught that ahead of time. Like, how do you portray yourself?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that women in general struggle with.
Yes.
Like, how do I appear confident but not
bitchy?
Pretty
which
much.
is, it's what the assumption is, right?
Yeah,
if you're
because
assertive.
I do feel like with men, confidence radiates authority.
Absolutely.
And, for us, it tends to get more of a negative impact.
Yeah.
And so I always try to be polite and confident and really secure with myself.
Yeah.
But so that affected me when it came to things like pricing.
Yeah.
So I had a skill level that may not have completely reflected my years of experience. So my skill level was far beyond what I had in terms of experience with, and I felt that I couldn't charge the prices that I really was worth because I needed more time. But I didn't. I was running a successful business. I was chatting with my clients. I was communicating. I was providing them a great quality of work.
Right.
And really fine-tuning with them images that were really important to them.
Yeah.
But I felt at the time,
sure,
like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. But it really wasn't anything but my own confidence that was holding me back.
And you were 26 when you opened your practice, right?
Yeah, which isn't even that young, like, really at all.
Yeah, but, I feel like in terms of business ownership, if you were to hear a story, right, about somebody opening their own business at 26 years old, what would you think? Would you think that was young?
I guess maybe
hearing
a little
the story
bit,
about it? Yeah, because I felt the same way. I opened mine when I was 25, and I didn't feel like I was not ready. I mean, in terms of like the practicalities of running the business, yes, I was not ready. Like I needed help and mentorship with that, and thankfully I had wonderful, actually mostly all men, mentor me about that, and they're all wonderful people and business owners. However, I didn't think like, oh my God, I'm way too young to start it. But then thinking back now and saying like, hey, I was 25 when I opened it, I was like, shit. Like if I went to a lawyer for help with a major felony and I heard they were 25, I'd be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to the 50-year-old. But I completely agree with you. And it's not to toot our own horns, but I also at the time knew my value of the work product that I had, and what commitment I had to my clients and to their causes, and what level of effort I was going to put into each and every client's case. And yet my age and my inexperience at running a business absolutely impacted, I think, for until maybe a couple months before I closed my practice.
Yeah.
So almost the entire 5 years, I just completely undersold myself. So it's difficult when I think you and I had this discussion before. Jennifer Lawrence was explaining her, pricing herself for a movie, and everyone critiques some celebrities by saying, hey, how many more millions of dollars do you need? But her point was, well, why shouldn't I be paid the same thing as my male co-star? Especially if I have the leading role,
Right.
Why shouldn't I be paid the same? And why should I have to defer to the studio? Of course the studio is going to pay me as little as possible to get me in. They want to be in and out of there with as few costs as possible. So if they can undersell you or underprice you, they will, because that's just good business.
Yeah.
Like, why are you going to overpay somebody if they're willing to accept, $3 million? Why are you going to offer them 10? But she said women in general, we are afraid to quote our worth.
Ask for more.
Ask for more,
Yeah.
because we'll be seen as demanding or bitchy or diva or whatever you want to call it. Whereas the men, it's just they're good, savvy businendmen. And I think
Negotiators.
Yes.
Great negotiators.
And
yeah.
you touched upon it earlier by saying that we're really never taught that. And it's funny because I don't know where males are like, explicitly taken aside and been like, hey dude, you make sure that you ask for what you're worth. But they do. They have this like bravado that allows them to just be so self-assured.
So I actually have to give a lot of credit to my husband for that, because he was the one that was really like, if you want to do this and continue doing it, you have to charge enough to be able to pay yourself.
Yeah.
Pay for future business expenses, pay for upgrading your equipment, pay your taxes.
Yeah.
And so if you're not charging the appropriate amount, like you won't be able to continue, because you're gonna.
Yeah.
It's gonna cost us money.
Way to go, Chris. I'm so proud of you.
So, and I would have to say, before I was a photographer, he was the one who also pushed me to negotiate for salary. And now when I talk to some of my friends, business-wise, I will, especially if they're not self-employed, I'll be like, you always counter. The worst they say is no.
Yeah.
If they want to hire you, they're going to hire you, but you counter.
Yeah, I've never countered a day in my life, and I feel like I've paid for that. But I think that's very true. Like I would have never thought. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You're giving me a job. Okay, yeah, no worries. I can pay.
Yeah.
I can get by on that amount.
Yeah.
I never thought.
I think we do with what we have.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes if you just reach a little bit more,
yeah,
it'll make your life a little easier.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe you can take the rare case where somebody really would love to hire you but might not financially be able to. Maybe you can choose then those rare cases where you will give someone a break, but you have to be able to not be scared on a daily basis that you can't pay your bills because you're trying not to be mean and tell people that you need to be paid a fair price.
So you actually talked about a couple things that also leads us into our next topic, which is operating in a saturated market.
Yes.
And so one of the things that really affected me is that, and I think it affects all business owners, and I do think in general all business owners are relatively similar, whether or not they're doing law or they're a photographer or they're doing, a fitness project. Basically, in the end, I think fear is such a motivator.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not always the best motivator.
No.
But so in operating in a saturated market, one of the things that really helped drive me to be fantastic at what I do, or really give it all my effort, was the fear of not booking clients. And that also went into me underpricing myself for I think the first 2 to 3 years. It was, someone's going to walk out that door. And I think that the last thing so I'm talking about in 3 stages. The last part of that would be also equating myself with my work. So if I was not booked, I would initially think this is a reflection of me, my personality, and my art.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah. I think those are great points, and running a business is not for everyone. And honestly, before I started mine, I never envisioned myself as a business owner, just because I felt like I was more a team player and just wanted to be behind the scenes doing the gritty work and just go home and let somebody else take care of the management side. But it's such a freaking hustle, especially in a oversaturated market, and mostly every market's oversaturated nowadays.
So, yeah.
But it's really, I think that, or I would like to think, that the more years you are running a business, the less fear-driven you are about where's your next client coming from. But sometimes it depends on your business plan, because, when that recession hit right around the time I graduated law school, there were friends of mine who had to go back to working in the mall. Trader Joe's wouldn't hire them because they're like, come on, you're a lawyer, and I'm going to lose you as soon as a firm job opens up. So why would I waste my time training you? Right. So I think when it's fear-based, it can be scary, and you can undercut yourself just to make sure that you're getting some sort of money. But when that recession hit in 2008, there were real estate attorneys trying to practice criminal law. Just to make some money, because the housing market had dried up.
Right.
So fear can really drive you. So it depends on how secure your business plan is, and kind of how much you kind of have tucked away for a rainy day fund of, am I going to weather through a drought in business for any particular period of time?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like nobody wants to anticipate that, but it can be very, very likely, regardless of what market you're in, that there might be a rough drought, and you have to kind of plan for that and make sure that whatever your business model is, that you're trying to anticipate that you're not going to be hanging on by a thread if a slow month, or maybe even a slow year, comes about and hits you. But in terms of the saturated market, how did you decide to try and stand out from the rest? Because I'd like to hear your experience, and then I'll tell you what mine was, because mine took a turn that nobody in my life would have ever anticipated.
So for me, I think I noticed a couple things that you sort of talked about a little bit already. So one was, there's a lot of older photographers that I think were jaded with the industry, and that what I saw out of that is they didn't really quite care anymore. It was a job, they were taking it, they were making money, they were, paying off their mortgages. So for me, what I think that showed me is having a type of ideal client actually was important. And I was trying to take whatever business information I could, and a bunch of people said that, but you don't really see it all the time.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is then start really thinking about what do I want to do? Who do I want to work with? What kind of clients do I want to bring in? And what I found is, genuinely, I want nice people. you know, and it sounds a little silly, but in the end, like, I wanted couples who were really just enthusiastic about getting married and spending this time with friends and family.
Right.
And to dive in a little bit deeper to that, it's what I mean to say is I wanted clients who really were excited to get married.
Yeah.
And not to necessarily, you know, having all the show of it. It wasn't about the
the theatrics.
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. It was really about spending this time together as a couple and experiencing it with their friends and family, the people who matter most to them. So what I decided to do is the photos that gave me joy were the emotional photographs. And so what I wanted to do is really work at that and make it so that way when you look through your images, it wasn't just a set of pretty pictures. You know, really, we were pulling out personality. We were pulling out character. We were pulling out, like, the love and connection that you have with your friends and family, and the connection you have together. So that's where I really started honing, bringing my art and showing images that had the emotional impact. Because I think, in the end, like, well, especially in my situation, so my mother-in-law passed back in April.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. The first thing we did was we, you know, I got married 2 years ago, but it was like, you know, you get dressed up on your wedding day, everybody looks beautiful. So we pulled up those images and, like, it's such a joyous day. And we had these beautiful images of her, and she just was, like, beaming from ear to ear. And, you know, I invested in my photographer, I had a great photographer.
Right.
And so we had these things, and those are the images that we put up, you know, when we did her funeral. And those are the ones that we're going to put up around the house.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, for us, it's just, like, I want these images to be important and show the people that are really important to you.
Yeah.
So I guess that's
That's beautiful. No, you're gonna make me cry. But I will say, like, it's funny that you say that about bringing out the personality in the couples, because every time I see you post a new wedding story and a new photo story of another couple that you've shot, I can see that, like, immediately.
Good.
Immediately.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just the stock, like, oh, the wedding dress hanging by the window and the shoes set up. Like, there are so many stock wedding photos. And unfortunately, my first marriage, you weren't in business at that time. And my second wedding, we kind of just, we just did a very much more informal kind of almost surprise thing. Yeah. But I really wish you could have been there for that one. And I know that you offered, and you're amazing, and I wish I could have had you there for it. Because it is, I think a lot of couples actually, mostly the brides, forget about that aspect of the day, like really appreciating the day and what it represents, and that it's supposed to be a celebration of love and joining two families together, two groups of people together. I feel like that should be the time where it's the little moments of beauty, of the joy from that day or the emotion from that day that really are the things, the moments that you want to remember. Not the, you know, all the bridesmaids on one side, all the groomsmen on the other, like stock photos.
That's the standard photos, and, like, you know, the family photos are really important, and we take our time to go through them. But, like, you know, I just posted yesterday. It was the groom seeing the bride for the first time.
I saw
His
that.
expression is just, like, so good.
I've told Evans this over and over again that I love when a man cries seeing his bride walk down the aisle. Like, I'm a sucker for that. Because you see this, like, you know, stereotypically heteronormative manly man, and then, you know, he cries because he's so excited. And so
it's the love is, like, overcoming him, and you can't.
Oh God, there's nothing better than a man crying seeing his wife. I know that sound. I think
families should just cry the whole day.
Hell yeah,
all day.
Hell yeah. I am all about that. I cry at a commercial. But I think you do an excellent job, and I think that does stand you apart and make you stand out from so many other stock photographers, because you have that heart.
Yeah, so that's actually what I was just about to say too, is so what I think in any business that helps set you apart is actually the empathy that you have for your clients.
Yes.
And especially something as gut-wrenching as yours, where it's like, you know, it's so much work and so many hours, and you put your heart and soul into this.
Yeah.
And really, like, for me with photography, it's that empathy with that client to really be able to deliver them an image that speaks to them and is meaningful.
Right, and to understand what about the day might be the most exciting
Exactly.
part for them, or what about their love story makes them stand out and makes them unique and brings them together. Like, I totally see that from your images.
Well, why don't you tell me about yours a little bit?
Sure,
I can
yeah.
make assumptions, but I'd love
Yeah,
to hear.
oh God, yeah. I don't know, like anyone who it's a pretty long story, and I'll leave that for the book, but I was going to be a prosecutor going into law school, and then halfway through it, I realized how fucked up the criminal justice system is, especially towards persons of color and those of lower socioeconomic status. So I decided to go criminal defense. And
Which is not glorious work.
no,
Not
and
close.
you know, my first husband's family are like, he had one uncle who would get drunk on holidays and be like, I think the defense lawyer should get the same sentence that the client gets. Yeah, I'm like, oh gee, thanks, Uncle so and so. Can you pass the carrots now? But yes, no, criminal defense lawyers are seen as, you know, sleazy and, you know, disgusting and diabolical and all of that, and promoting crime and all of that crap. So that in and of itself, especially coming from, you know, my number one hero in life is my father, and so he was a federal agent for over 30 years, and I wanted to be just like him, so I wanted to be an FBI agent. He wasn't an FBI, but I wanted to be an FBI agent, and then an agent at the Penn State's job fair told me that because of my diabetes, I was disqualified, but if I wanted to, I could sue the agency for an exception. And I was like, I'm not doing a Serpico type moment where I'm going to be like shot by friendly fire because I sued my employer. So I was going to be a prosecutor and get the bad guys, and then I realized it's not as black and white as that. And then the first trial that I did with my former boss was a alleged child molestation trial of the man's daughter, youngest daughter. And it turns out that the wife was using this allegation and kind of brainwashed the daughter into this story to use as leverage in the divorce.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the case was just really crazy, but she had convinced her daughter that daddy helping her wipe herself after going number 2 was actually sexual molestation. So we did that trial, and we did it in front of a judge because when it comes to sex crimes, jurors, I've believed, have tended to be a little more on the conservative side, where they'll say, I don't think he did it, but like, let's just be overly cautious and keep him in jail for a couple decades. So we did the trial in front of just the judge, and the judge found him not guilty. And so we got his record expunged. You know, there were no longer any charges on his record, but he had been on electronic monitoring, house arrest for the last 2 years, waiting for trial. His entire neighborhood had heard the word, so thought he was a pedophile. And then, you know, you get to the most heartbreaking part, which is the fact that his 2 daughters have been convinced by their mother that, you know, their father is a predator and had abused one of them. So you're never going to have that relationship with your children again. And you haven't been proven to have done anything wrong. It's just these allegations, you know, and there's not even, it's different from the Law and Order shows and NCIS and all that stuff. They call it the CSI effect. Prosecutors actually say that during every trial now. They'll say, like, this isn't CSI. We're not going to present you with a ton of DNA evidence and forensic evidence, like, you know, to kind of lower their expectations as to the evidence. But it was after that trial where I started looking more and more into the effect of allegations of sex offenses and then the consequences of being convicted of a sex offense. And so I had left my former employer and teamed up with a friend from law school who had a much different business plan than I did and didn't have the heart. No offense to him, he's a great business person, he saw it as a business. He saw criminal defense as a business. So he wanted to get as many small, like misdemeanor cases that took maybe one court appearance as to one felony case where you had to go to court like 40 times, but get a bigger paycheck, where it turns out your billable hours a little bit smaller with the felony because of how much work you have to put in. So he was good with, going to court in the mornings and surfing in the afternoons. Like, fine, that's fine. I'm not gonna knock it, but that just wasn't my practice, and I couldn't feel comfortable practicing criminal defense without having my heart in it. And as to your point about the empathy, those that I admire the most, and my mentors and the people that I've admired, have all had that deep, deep sense of empathy. And I think we all can have a little bit more, but it's funny that one of the last conferences I went to for doing court-appointed work in Massachusetts before I left for Texas was a keynote speaker who addressed empathy fatigue, which is a real thing that a lot of criminal defense lawyers get because we empathize so much and take these cases home with us and to heart that we actually get burnt out really fast. But that's how I decided to stand out in an oversaturated market, was to become the sex crimes attorney and to become so knowledgeable in it, because I noticed that even some of my mentors didn't want to take those cases. They were mostly males, they had daughters of their own, totally understand. They would never, they couldn't bear to represent someone who was charged with possession of child pornography, because all they see is like, oh my God, if it was my daughter, I would like beat the shit out of him. So I can't represent him. So at least they knew that about themselves, and they were like, hey, you want the case, you take it. So it's not to say that I didn't empathize with the victims. That's a critique that some state senators and representatives would make when I was testifying on behalf of different nonprofit organizations for criminal justice bills at the State House. They would essentially say, like, I don't care about the victims, and I'm trying to promote the commission of more sex crimes, but
it's just slander to make you look bad.
It's, all I was trying to do was have a logical, rational, fact-based debate on the issue and to talk about what the consequences can be. So, like, something like a housing restriction, that's fine. You want to tell them they can't live X number of feet from a school, but let's talk about what the statistics say. The statistics say that it doesn't matter so much about the school. It's really about them going outside a mile past their house, so that if they're going to prey on someone, nobody recognizes them from the neighborhood. It's about the fact that something like 93 or 94% of sex offenders who offend against children, the child knows the offender prior to the incident. So it's not about a stranger lurking at the schoolyard. It's about, the guy who starts dating the single mom and offers to babysit them while mom takes a double shift. It's about the judo coach. It's about, so it's someone who
we've seen a lot of coaches lately.
Tons. Yeah. Jerry Sandusky, after I graduated from Penn State.
I forgot.
That was a crazy one. So I was trying to be the voice, and I wasn't the only one by any means, and especially in Massachusetts, I had so many amazing mentors, but in Rhode Island, kind of one of the only ones who had the heart behind it. So I became known as the sex crimes attorney, and then there would be even counselors would refer me to their clients. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, because, they referred a bunch of homeless clients my card, offering basically free services that I wasn't offering at the moment. But I tried as much as I could to do as much pro bono work as I could. But like we talked about, having the balance, and there's so many hours in a day. But it made me stand out. And instead of being the 200th DUI attorney who's just saying, like, come to me, give me 10 grand and I'll get you off, which is totally unethical, but there are those out there that do it. I ended up standing out almost like unintentionally, because I saw some really negative consequences in a particular area of law, some unfair consequences that weren't helping society, that were actually potentially endangering society. You know, that housing restriction, a lot of them, in Florida, it's so bad that they would have to live under an underpass of a bridge, and it would list it on their state IDs as living under the overpass of, you know, route whatever. And another one had a patch of tents set up in the woods, because the woods was the only place in the city where it didn't violate the law. And the probation officer would say, okay, you're out of prison, now go to your tent in the middle of the woods and I'll come out tomorrow and check on you. Like, just insanity. And I saw that in Rhode Island because we had such a law, and there were almost a dozen all men with some developmental disabilities that were in an assisted living facility, and they were convicted sex offenders, and they were 14 feet allegedly too close to the school, although we never found out just how they measured it, whether it was from the exactly. And yet outside of their kitchen window was a play school and a daycare center, and it had like a total play area for the kids running around all day right outside their kitchen window, and that didn't violate the law.
That doesn't quite make any sense.
Right, so there was a reporter who did this kind of expose saying these guys are living too close to the school. So the police, even though they had kind of quietly sent them there, the probation officers that sent them there, checked on them, told them it was okay to live there, then told them they had a month to get out or be arrested for another felony, which is failing to register as a sex offender, and it's also considered a new sex offense, so it increases your danger to the community, your sex offender level. So I was trying to say, like, what would you rather have? Would you rather have them, you know, all in one place, taking their meds, being driven to and from treatment, to and from appointments, the doctors, the probation officers, etc., or would you rather have them out in the street? Because it was the only one open in the state to them. If they couldn't go to the homeless shelter down the street because it housed women and children, and they refused to let sex offenders in, understandably, you know, would you rather have them unmedicated,
I mean, roaming around the woods, that
roaming around, right? Unable to figure out where they are. So, anyways, kind of a diatribe.
Make sure they're taking their medication.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
That's the bigger thing.
Exactly.
That gets into some mental health. We could have a whole nother discussion on that.
We definitely should, because I should mention that we're at the wonderful Warwick Public Library recording this episode, and I am currently reading an amazing new book that I just checked out a few days ago, that the title of it is escaping me, but it is all about mental health in America and the history of kind of incarcerating the mentally ill, and the revolving door that a lot of mentally, developmentally deficient persons and mentally ill people have with the criminal justice system, because we don't treat them better. Anyways, we should have that discussion.
But so it sounds like essentially one of the ways that you grew your business is really specializing in some of the most difficult cases.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy, and I had to watch a lot of child pornography, to be honest.
Oh my God.
I had to, part of my job, and a lot of other attorneys I knew wouldn't do it. They would, basically, if you possess at least 3 or more images, then you were guilty. So they would go to either the state police headquarters or the FBI office and view at least 3, and then be like, okay, I'm done. But what's really important is during sentencing, especially in federal court, you can get a sentence enhancement for the number of images, for the type of images, whether there's any, sort of BDSM, torture, etc. So I believe, ethically, it was my duty to, I'm not watching the whole video, I can kind of click through a couple clips of it, but I want to get a general idea, general sense of if you're claiming that he has 20,000 images. You know, I had one case where I was in there for like 3 or 4 hours, and it was kind of a cubicle like this, and they had cameras looking at me as I looked at the child porn, which was super fucking awkward, and it made me feel skeevy. But I noticed that like a couple thousand were actually like JPEGs of like the forest, you know, background screensaver type files. And they counted it because they didn't bother to look through all 20,000 images. It was my job because I was depriving my clients of effective advocacy and the best advocacy possible if I didn't get a sense of what the images were. Did I want to watch a cat licking a toddler? Absolutely not, but I had to. So I would speak to FBI agents, and a lot of times in any kind of law enforcement facility, they would kind of, poor bastards, they would designate a male or a female law enforcement agent to kind of be the go-to person who would get these cases. And so I spoke to one female FBI agent, and she was like, yeah, I've been doing this 7 years, and I'm completely burnt out. And I totally got it. I totally understood it. Because while, you know, I'm certainly not saying that all of my clients were guilty of the crimes they were alleged to have committed, but damn if it isn't hard to watch child porn and look at color photographs of dead bodies, you know, with bullet holes in them, that it can take a lot out of you. So I did, you know, I made that decision, and I feel like I made a good impact, and I know that there are others that made an even greater impact and still do, but it's a hard way to make a living. It's not, you know, that's why I say my former partner, maybe he had a better idea, but you know what, in my opinion,
He's going to sleep at night.
Exactly, not woken up to terrors, but you know, somebody's got to do it, and there's got to be somebody that does the heavy lifting.
So you sort of, from my understanding, not being a lawyer, so the two things that I wanted to bring up with that is, one, it's the idea that so some of your clients, I'm imagining, had some pretty severe mental health issues.
Oh, yes.
I wouldn't think most people that, you know, I would expect like a medication, a therapist could probably go a long way. And the other thing is actually, what is the role of prison in situations like this, where we cannot take someone and throw them away for the rest of their life and just pretend they don't exist. So really it's about like how to integrate someone into a community, even someone as terrible as a child molester.
Right.
So if those people are able to function in society with medication and therapy, I think, you know, being able to, and I think some of those clients probably recognized that they had a problem, didn't know.
Yes, and but to probably most people's surprise, far fewer than society would have you think. You know, everyone assumes if someone has committed child molestation that they are a pedophile, and pedophilia is a diagnosed medical condition, mental health condition, and not every person who committed child molestation had pedophilia.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. And that's that can be a whole nother topic for another episode. But there's in Massachusetts there's sex offender civil commitment, which means after your criminal sentence has run out, if they find that you're too dangerous to society, they can civilly commit you. Your quote unquote, they don't call it a sentence, but you're issued a duration of quote unquote 1 day to life. So they pretty much keep you in there, and every couple of years they'll give you a review of whether you've made any progress. But for the most part, no, the mental health aspect of it wasn't for every person who had been convicted of a sex crime. But even for non-sex crimes, you know, I touch upon this in the book a bit, but there was one poor client who actually was a paranoid schizophrenic, and his family just didn't know what to do for him anymore because they had been living with this for a number of years. And every time he went off his meds, he would, end up committing a crime and then be brought into jail. And so, or prison in this case. And so I went to the prison one time, and the employees there knew that I liked to go on Sunday mornings because it was a lot faster to get in and out because there were no other attorneys going in there visiting their clients then. But when I went one time and they were like, "Oh, you can't go see your client," and I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, he's on suicide watch in the medical unit," and I said, "Okay," and they kind of chuckled. And then the next time I came back, and they were like, "Oh, you're here to see so and so," and I was like, "Yeah, asshole, let me go see him." And so when they're seen to be a danger to themselves or others, sometimes they're held in the hospital ward. So there was a few times where I was brought up there, and they took me in to see him in an exam room, and shut the door and had him sitting at a door at a chair right at the door, and had me seated on the opposite side of the room in the doctor's chair.
That's weird.
And so in order for me to leave the
You had
room,
to pass him.
I had to pass him. And he came on to me and
That seems like a gross overstep on their part.
Yep, proposed to have sex on the patient bed right next to him. And I politely and firmly and immediately turned him down and tried to redirect his conversation to the charges at hand, but then I had to leave the room, and in order to do that, I had to pass him. So that was one of my more uncomfortable moments in the jails and prisons that I frequented. But another time, after he was done with suicide watch, they put him in segregation. And so when you have client visits, they'll normally bring them down to a visiting room, but if they're in seg, you usually have to go up to seg to visit them, and they are put in a cage and then inside a room, and then you can sit on the other side of the cage and talk to them. So I went to go see him a little while later, and it took a full year for me to get him, instead of a period of incarceration, to get him into an inpatient facility. It took me at least a year to get the court to agree and to get an inpatient facility to take him. So one time I went, and they were laughing, and they were like, "Yeah, we found him smearing his feces all over the wall and drinking his toilet water," and they were laughing, and I was so angry that they had such lack of empathy that they could be chuckling at this man being so mentally ill that he was using his feces as like paint and drinking his toilet water. And in this book that I'm reading, she looks at the LA County Jail because they have a large hospital unit in there. And they talk about the fact that the correctional officers, they really don't have training in being mental health workers. And so there is a bit of understanding in that they're not trained to deal with these kind of issues, but in my opinion, even if you're not trained to it, and even if it's a heavy issue and you don't want to take it too much to heart, you don't fucking laugh at it. So it was very difficult, because then you also have an obligation to make sure if your client makes any kind of legal decision in court that he's mentally competent to do so. So it's your obligation as an attorney to decide whether he's of right sound body and mind to enter into his decision. Yeah, we can have a whole nother episode. There's an issue of like forced medication and whether you can force a person and whether that violates their constitutional rights. But then how do you know if they would, in their right mind, quote unquote, want to refuse medication because they're not in their right mind and you need the medication to get them there. And so it's
So, in you explaining all of this,
Mhm.
it seemed like the obvious question would be, how did you navigate your clients and their view of you, and even working with them
Yeah.
as a woman,
As a woman,
when
that's a great question.
most of the time the clients
They were alleged sex offenders, yeah.
exactly.
That's a great question. And I'll say I was come on to by a couple of clients. Unfortunately, not too many, and most were professional. But not all of them were charged with sex crimes. So that's a whole nother issue. And dealing with clientele who can be incredibly disrespectful is very difficult. But I'll tell you, for the majority of my clients, they were actually extremely respectful towards me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is not being scared by, like, you know, there would be oftentimes I would be meeting with a client in the prison, and other prisoners would be being ushered by to go to, like, say chow, go eat lunch. And we would be sitting in the room, maybe the door's open, and so these, 50, 60 inmates would be walking by and someone would catcall me. As a woman, you have to present yourself in such a way that you are not showing any vulnerability and not being rattled by someone doing that, because if you're seen as being vulnerable, then they're going to do it more.
Opportunity.
Yeah. So, so that was something that I initially had to learn to do pretty fast. But it's also, if you're respecting your clients, they're much more likely to respect you back.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I had a really good rapport. Some of my most respectful clients were convicted of some of the most heinous offenses. Like,
That's interesting.
I had, someone with a pretty high body count treat me very, very respectfully, and always never say Kate, even though I would encourage my clients to call me by their first name, by my first name. Always Mrs. Godin or Attorney Godin. It was interesting. But I feel like when you're the best person, or the most likely person to be able to get them a shorter sentence or a not guilty verdict or treatment or whatever it is, if you're the most likely person to do so, they have more of an incentive to treat you with respect. Mm-hmm. At least while that possibility is still out there. Maybe after the trial's over and they're pissed off, they respond differently. But while they still have that opportunity where I can help facilitate whatever they're looking for, whatever outcome they're looking for, they're incredibly respectful for the majority of them. And sometimes even the most mentally ill. You have to treat them with respect and not be condescending, but some of them were incredibly respectful and wonderful people, honestly. And I still, one of my clients ended up passing of liver failure a couple years after I moved to Texas, and his mother called me and let me know, and it was really hard for me. It was really hard for me. Like, I've gone to a client's wake before.
I imagine
when he
in some of
overdosed.
these cases you have really intimate relationships with them.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time, you are really, besides like maybe a priest, you know the nitty gritty, because you have to have that trust in order to do your job properly.
Is that why you asked to be referred to as Kate?
Yes, honestly. Well, also because, I had when I was working for a firm, I had the firm's manager tell me always introduce yourself as Attorney Godin, attorney. Make sure when you speak to anyone on the phone or the court or whatever, you tell them it's attorney. And I'm like, all right, come on. I don't need to be that in your face about it, really. But, yes, I even dressed down in the office. I would very rarely, if I didn't have to go to court, wear a suit. I would have a suit at my office in case I needed to go to court or to a police station. But I would usually wear a sweater and jeans And a lot of clients responded to that very positively, saying that they felt more comfortable and at ease because it was almost like the relationship was more equal, and it wasn't this very
Authority figure.
oh yeah. So if I'm gonna ask you like
Well,
how many plastic bags you fucked in the
Oh.
dumpster that got you picked up for your latest sex crime, like we better be on pretty good terms.
Well, I also imagine that, so let's say you have a high percentage of clients that have mental health issues. They probably aren't able to get attention or seek medical attention because they're not on the highest social economic status.
Absolutely.
In which case, if you show up in a fancy suit, they're sort of looking at you like, how can you possibly relate to my situation?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a smart move.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I feel like I was comfortable with it.
Good.
So, but on your end, being a photographer, kind of documenting a client's or the client's one of their happiest days, hopefully. In their
I feel
lives.
like our type of work is both emotionally exhausting, but for very different reasons.
So, do you tend to have like a lot of demanding clients? Or?
So I think what I've really tried to do is build a business that reflects the type of clients that I both relate to and want to work with, and in general, I think they really hold me to a high standard when it comes to the art, but when it comes to recognizing that I'm a person, and they are really much more down to earth and reasonable. And what I try to do, and what any business I would always suggest, is set expectations and adhere to them.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
don't say you're going to deliver the world and then just come up with a cupcake.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
So really, and that has to do with me understanding my limits and being able to communicate that. And I think just having very honest, open communication the whole way is really important. And I'm sure you do the same when you were sort of talking to clients about.
You cannot give them false hope. You cannot. It's almost as very simple and what some might consider insignificant as when you'll call them back.
Oh my God,
or when you'll come out and see them. If you tell them, I'm going to come out tomorrow and see you, and you don't come out, there's going to be like a report to the ethics board that you are defunct in your duties. In fact, AVO or AVO, I never remember how they pronounce it, but there is a website, and I think it's now for doctors and lawyers, but it used to be just specifically for lawyers to rate them and have them answer questions and things. And one of my clients, I never asked them to review me because obviously for confidentiality reasons, and I feel like that was an imposition given the nature and sensitivity of my work. But one client chose on a non-sex crime to rate me and review me, and he said one of the most amazing things was if she told you she was going to call you back in 15 minutes, you were getting a call in exactly 15 minutes. I never overbooked. I never scheduled appointments that I knew I probably wouldn't make it back from court in time for. I always, and that was the benefit of, it's also working 16-hour days, but that was the benefit of being my own business owner, was that I could do that. Public defenders don't have that opportunity. They don't have that ability to set times to see clients and to pace it out in such a way that they're never going to be back to back or in the waiting room for more than 2 minutes. Their caseload is just too overwhelming. But for me, I always ran it where I devoted the time that I needed to that client and really made sure that I respected their time as much as I asked them to respect mine.
Exactly, I think that reciprocity.
Reciprocity,
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think, and I feel like I need to take a little bit of time, so weekends are off, and a lot of times I'm working the weekend. And then otherwise, trying to, I say like, between emails and phone calls, I try to do it within 48 hours to make sure that they get some type of response.
Right.
But yeah, I think, the management and the expectation is the most important for any business.
Absolutely. I couldn't
To maintain and
emphasize-
have a client.
yes.
Which also brings me to the next thing is your hustling. So
Absolutely,
how to hustle with building that business and establishing that name. So how did you sort of navigate that, especially in the earlier days?
Yeah, I know, because I'm a little bit older than you. And
By like a year.
no, I was kind of operating at a time where social media wasn't as big. Like, I started in 2009, and excuse me, I think in 2005 I joined Facebook, but that was at a time where it was only if you had a valid college address, so it wasn't even open to the
Oh my
full
God, I was
public.
thinking of that the other day.
Yeah,
All my
right?
college Facebook photos are
Yeah.
gone. I think Facebook got rid of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. My first photo is definitely not my first photo. It's like from law school, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. But it was at a time where the internet wasn't as important as it is nowadays.
Prominent,
Yeah. But I did everything I could think of. I bought books on search engine optimization. So before I paid a friend to do my website, revamp my website, I used WordPress. I created my own. I figured out how Google and other search engines have their algorithms to rank a website and like rank its prominence. So basically coding behind your website's page, the invisible stuff, so that it will rank you higher, so that you'll be on like page 1 of the search results if you type in Rhode Island criminal lawyer. So knowing what terms people are most likely to type in, like it's different because now for Instagram, like you type in hashtag, the future is female, and you get to find out how many other people have used that hashtag. So you can check and see whether if you pluralize something, it's going to be more prevalently searched than the singular form. So this might be a little too intricate of a discussion, but and I had no desire to know this stuff in the beginning, but I had to because I was like, I'm not. You know that phrase, you gotta make
Make it.
well, but also you have to spend money to make money.
Oh yes, yeah. Which is true.
Which is true. Absolutely true. I am way too cheap to have ever fully bought into that mindset. So I was scraping by any chance I could like undercut one of my operating costs. I was doing it.
Yeah.
Like instead of having a fax line, I paid $10 a month for myfax.com and would have it anytime someone would fax my fax number, it would electronically be sent to my email by PDF. So I could view it in court. Things that made it easier so that I never had any support staff. I'm not advocating for this for any of you.
I agree.
if you can afford support staff,
do it. Yeah.
But I just chose, my business plan was never...
Well, I think there's a big difference between spending money recklessly. So
True.
yes, you have to invest in yourself and your business in
Yes.
order to actually turn a profit.
Right.
But doing so responsibly and irresponsibly makes a big difference. And so knowing that you could pay for a fax line as opposed to investing at that time. I mean, how much were those things? Pretty ridiculous.
$10 a month. I don't know. I can't even think about, because it would have had to be a separate landline.
Yeah.
So you would have had to pay that monthly fee. It is. It's about figuring out being smart with your money.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, not reckless, but being smart with your money. So that was part of my hustle. The other part was getting over, I don't want to say bragging about myself, but sometimes, if you've ever heard that like sometimes the most effective commercials are the most annoying ones.
True. What makes you think of them?
So it's not so much about whether it's a good commercial or a fun commercial or something that makes you smile. You could be annoyed as shit about the jingle or the ad. The ad doesn't even have to fucking make sense. But if you can remember that it's for
You made an
Geico,
impact.
they're gonna, when you think of insurance, your thought's gonna go right to Geico. So for me, I had to get over, Facebook didn't really have business pages at the beginning, but then towards the end of owning my firm, it did. So I ran those pages. But in the interim, I was posting a lot on Facebook, and I was posting a lot of interesting articles about like someone who got arrested for something crazy, or an interesting issue that came up, or I would also blog about it. And in fact, when the first transgendered female was housed in the Massachusetts Civil Commitment Center for sex offenders, she was asking to obviously be housed with females because she identified as female, and she was also asking for hormones, and she was like, look, I
do remember this case.
Yeah, I did not ask to be civilly committed. It is past my criminal sentence, so you can't deprive me for the rest of my life of my hormones. I have severe depression if I'm not on them. And so the issue was whether the Commonwealth should have to pay for that. And the other issue, the bigger one, was that there aren't enough female sex offenders to actually house them separately. So the question was like, where do we put her? So I had blogged about it on my website. A reporter from the Associated Press called me, and she was like, so do you, and this was well before Laverne Cox and Caitlyn Jenner, and so the issue of transgendered and transsexual people was still very much not talked about that much. And so this reporter called me up, and she was like, so how much of your practice do you devote to representing transgendered individuals? And I was like, well, I don't actually dedicate or focus any of my practice towards representing transgendered or transsexual individuals. I'm not selling myself as advocating for their civil rights. I actually don't know enough about that law to suggest that I could represent them well enough. I just blogged about it, but she assumes because when she went to go look for that case, my website came up, that I somehow was either representing a woman or...
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You were just trying to educate the public.
I was trying to educate the public and also keep my website active, keep my blog active, and keep...
It's an interesting subject for sure.
Oh, completely. And of course, I'm a bleeding heart liberal, so of course it tugged at my heartstrings, and I'm a very big advocate for the LGBTQ plus community, but it just didn't happen to be what my practice was about. But it was funny that she assumed it because I had blogged about it. But it happened a few times where I would talk about an issue and the website would like come right to my page instead of more credible sources. But it was really about also keeping my name and what I did present in my social media community's mind. So there were a ton of people over the years, obviously I'm not naming any names, but there may or may not have been prior classmates of mine from different periods in my life who may or may not have come to me, and just by remembering through Facebook that I was a lawyer, came to me and asked me to represent either them or their family member or whatever. So how about you?
It's kind of funny that you say that, because I think when the first 2 to 3 years I think I was in business, Facebook was really starting to pick up. It had opened up to the rest of the population,
Right.
And parents. I remember parents are on Facebook.
So then they had to create other things that were cooler so that the old people didn't see what they were up to.
Right. So, and the nice thing was, I felt like it did get me in touch with a lot of it got me clients that I had not kept up in touch with from high school.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I worked with, and even some girls, mainly brides, end up getting in touch with me more so than grooms. But they knew that I was in business, were able to see the quality of the work, and knew me from high school. And I mean, hopefully it showed I wasn't an asshole because they reached out.
Yeah.
And said,
Well,
you
people
know,
can change from what they were in high school as well, but I would
Well,
never
they
imagine you
had
to be an asshole.
reasonable
Yeah.
thoughts about
Yes.
me because I
Yeah.
wouldn't have called some people that I knew back then.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, so it got me in touch, and I actually photographed for some people that I wouldn't. We weren't even in the same social circles, but it was really
Right.
nice to get to know them that way.
Yeah.
After high school, which was kind of cool. And then after that, what I really found is networking was so difficult for me. I went from, I actually think in 6th grade, so I was new to school. I don't think I talked for almost a full year.
Oh my gosh.
I know, I was so shy.
Aww.
And I have 2 older brothers, so eventually they beat that out of me pretty
Excellent.
much.
Good job, guys.
Not physically.
I know.
Just clarify that. But they worked it out of me.
Yep.
And so I had to be front and center, and it made me so nervous to have to go and talk to, especially starting out, people that I didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
And start conversations with them.
Yep.
And I don't consider myself a conversationalist.
I think you're a great conversationalist.
It's funny that you say that, because normally I'd be like, no, I'm going to hide under this blanket.
Oh, yeah. But every time we connect, we talk nonstop and very, very fast pitches. If you guys haven't noticed that we might be talking very, very, very fast, because we tend to do that because whenever we catch up with one another, we have hours and hours
Of conversation.
Yeah.
So it was intimidating, and
Yeah.
I felt difficult, but extremely important. And I felt like now I see the results of those hours of networking. And ideally, what I just tried to do is just find people that I could actually have a genuine relationship with.
That's
It
great.
wasn't about brown nosing.
Yep.
In the end, it was about connecting with other people in the industry who also want to deliver quality products to people that they felt were important and cared about their businesses.
That's so important. Yeah.
So
Because you can reciprocate, and for me, I never felt I always felt it had to be organic.
yes.
So if I was going to suggest someone to someone I knew, especially if they were friends or family, you'd be sure that I was not just doing it to like throw them a bone back because they had given me a case. And but it's hard to do because there are, and I think we should maybe talk a little bit about that. And I'd like to ask you of because the last time that you and I met privately, we talked about female professional groups and networking groups, or the lack thereof. But for me, it's the same thing, like, being and you were an athlete as well, but for me, being in the news for track and field and being interviewed by reporters, that got me a little bit more used to it. So I had a little bit of a head start. And then when I had to do public speaking in college, I was like, okay. I basically have no shame. So that helps. And then, once I had to do trial advocacy in law school, and I fucking loved it, but there were classmates of mine who were like, oh my God, this is the worst experience ever, because you have to be in front of a room of people.
It makes you vulnerable.
Yes.
And, not a lot of people want to open up.
Or push past that vulnerability or push past that fear. Absolutely.
And that's another motivator right there. Your fear of rejection and failure is so high. So I think it can stop a lot of people from being successful.
Yeah, dead in their tracks. But you have to, and that's why, like I said, I don't think running your own business is for everyone, nor should it be,
That's true.
I think it might come out of necessity for some people. Maybe they can't find a job and they have to do it, but for those of you who might be considering whether to go out on your own, consider whether your personality is conducive to it, because you do. You have to put in a lot of hours of, I joined a couple networking groups, and I am not a schmoozer. Oh my God. And that was so hard for me in law school, because no offense to my law school or my colleagues, but a lot of it's like playing golf. Don't play golf.
You may not have had the same interests.
Yeah. A lot of it is like you pay $50 and you get free beer or wine. I didn't drink either beer or wine at the time I was networking. So I would basically just be paying to be able to be in the room with these people. And then it was very cliquey, and then a lot of it was, what can you do for me type of thing. And so I was actually in DC in my law school. One of the alumni had hosted a gathering for those of us who were going to be inducted into the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court's bar, so to be able to practice in front of the Supreme Court. So we got,
That's exciting.
yeah, it was really fun. It was really cool. I got to see RBG from just a few feet away. But we were at this thing, and there were some kids that I say kids, but they were law students, so they were obviously adults, and they had gone from Rhode Island to DC just to go to this event to be able to schmooze with potential employers. And so one kid came up to me and he was like, oh yeah, I want to do maritime law. And I was like, oh yeah, my friend is out in California doing that right now. And he's like, oh, what's his name and contact information? And I gave it to him, and then he was like, okay, thanks, bye.
Ouch.
And I was like, Jesus Christ, douche. Like, that's why I hate coming to these fucking things, because it's all about, like, it's a transactional thing. So, as you can see, I am not the most polished person and have a bit of a potty mouth. So I don't always represent in the highest socioeconomic status group gatherings, which a lot of lawyer bullshit happens at. So, and being criminal defense, we're kind of like looked down upon because we're like the lowly people. We're not like the corporate lawyers with the big, 6-figure salaries. So, a lot of that was very inorganic to me. And so
It's an inorganic
Yeah.
situation, in which
Yes.
case you're expected to make an organic relationship.
Yes.
So it's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But I do think there are business owners there. I've definitely made some great connections. I actually do now work with a wedding planner 1 or 2 times a year. She's fabulous, and she gives everything to her business.
That's
and,
wonderful.
I met her at one of these networking things.
Great.
And some great floors. I've definitely met some wonderful people in the industry.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you kind of have to search for them sometimes.
yeah, but it is.
It
I
takes
feel
a-
like when you're new and you don't know, now when I
Okay.
go to a networking event, it's almost like just catching up with your friend and seeing
Yeah.
what's going on. But when you get started, you're like, I don't even know where to begin. I'm just
Right.
going to drink this Coke in the corner and
Yeah.
eat something off the table.
Yep.
But I think the more you put yourself out there, the more you increase the odds that you will make a connection,
Right.
a genuine, organic connection with
Yeah.
someone who feels
And-
the same way.
And maybe not even going up to them as that one law student did and like suck me for the contact information and then leave me.
Does he not realize that you could have just called your friend and be like, yeah, don't do that?
I know, right? I should have. Oh my God, I should have. I never even thought that I should do that. I'd be like, hey, watch out for this asshole. But I think it's just approaching somebody else and being like, hey, hi, how are you? What's your name? What do you do? Oh, I do this. And maybe not even like, immediately be like, here's my business card. Make sure you call me if anyone gets arrested. Like,
Right.
like you said, being organic and just developing and seeing if there's an actual authentic connection, and then getting to know them and their business practices a little more.
Exactly. It's
and
almost
really
the follow-up
understand
is
it.
even more
Yes.
important.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you have that 10-minute conversation at that event
Right.
and you feel like you got along really well and you're
Right.
excited to learn more about them, then you get that business card, you go home, you send an email later and be like, I'd love to take you out for coffee and
Yeah.
chat more, and from there you can sort of develop that relationship a lot more. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think those are great tips. Now, in terms of female networking, have you felt like there could be stronger connections and networking opportunities for women in business?
This is a good question. So as of the moment, I would say a lot of the networking events that I go to, I think the industry, weddings in general, are just higher in women in general.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But what I would say is there is a little bit of a generational difference, in which case I notice that some of the individuals that are in the industry longer, they might be burnt out. And they don't
really give a shit to network it.
Yeah. And so they're not really interested in developing relationships, whereas the younger individuals, they're interested in helping and meeting and connecting, collaborating. But I would say, so leave the older, bitter people alone.
Yeah.
And
You'll be able to spot them pretty fast.
pretty quickly, yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say that something that I did find that was really helpful for me is when I my very first year, I did an internship for another woman photographer, and she's fantastic. And she was so helpful in mentoring me to get me where I need to be.
Yeah.
And I can accredit so much of my business and where it is to
Right.
that help. So I do try to pay it forward with other women, because I think in the end we all suffer from very similar fears or
Sure.
motivations. You know, like putting some dinner on the table
Right,
is important, and
right.
paying your mortgage or
Yeah.
your rent or whatnot, and then the fear of being insecure and unwanted and not having work that's good enough is so strong.
Or not having the experience at running the practice, or
Yeah. And I think in the end, like we were saying, communication was so helpful with building client relationships and expectations, and like those basic business fundamentals. I think are just important for everyone.
and they're worth they bear repeating, because, and as funny as it sounds, like a lot of people, even though it seems very commonsensical, like a lot of people don't seem to have gotten the memo.
Yeah.
Not to be a dick.
Right.
Like not to be like a blowhard who's just gonna suck you dry and then spit you back out.
Yeah.
So to be gracious, to be respectful, to not to not look at your elders as if they're old and tired and by the wayside, and so you're just going to come in and show them how much better you are than them, in a very respectful way. You can try and take very helpful wisdom and years of experience and, fables as well as success stories, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that they might have had to go through on their own.
I remember in 6th grade, our teacher had asked us, like, she had asked the classroom, do we think that we can learn from other people's mistakes? And I was like one of the only students, and I was like, yes, absolutely. I have 2 older brothers, and I look at them all the time and I say, don't do that. If you're going to do something like that, do it this way. So, yes, absolutely. And I think one of the good things is if photographers in general, they have a very good referral network. And it's basically, we can only take one job a day. If we're doing more than one job a day, we may not be the best photographer.
Right.
But we can only devote that energy to that client. So when we have multiple inquiries for these dates, then we typically send them to people whose work we respect and admire, and we also feel like they treat their clients well, so because we're giving that recommendation.
Right.
So we refer each other a lot, and I think having a network of people that you can talk to about potential problems or about concerns or fears, then that's really important. I actually have another photography friend. She pretty much started her business about the same time as me, and we frequently chat about, how do I respond to this email, how do I set these limits, and then, how do I give more even.
Right.
So she's been instrumental. Hi, Kelly. and really building my business. And I think we've mutually helped each other quite a bit. So,
yeah, shout out to Kelly.
Yeah.
I think that is a really important thing to emphasize, is you have to ask questions. You have to not be afraid or too prideful to ask questions.
Don't be afraid of how you're going to come off. Just ask the question.
And you and I were chatting right before the podcast about my, greatest fear in running my practice, and that was that I was going to fuck up somebody's life. Not a little fear,
It's a very practical.
just a little scare. And that's, yes, you have liability insurance for a reason, and everyone's human, everyone's going to make mistakes. That's why when there's a claim against a criminal defense attorney, it's called ineffective assistance of counsel, and it's actually a constitutional term that came from the Supreme Court. There's a standard that has to be proven in order to say that your attorney was that bad, that you deserve some sort of remedy. It's different for when you're like suing an attorney civilly and you want money from them. Usually my clientele, they just wanted to get out of prison or get a new trial. So, but it petrified me constantly that I would fuck something up. And so one thing that I learned, and that even the head of the ethics bar or the board in Rhode Island told a group of us was, if you're one of the ones worrying, you're probably good. Like you're caring enough. If you care enough that you're gonna fuck up, then you're probably gonna do the work so that you have a smaller chance that you're gonna fuck up. So that was really what scared me, and what helped me get over it was just being able to tell a client, I don't know. If they ask me a question and I did not know the answer, don't fucking fake it till you make it. Especially in something as serious as that. Law. Maybe some other practices you can get away with it. But for any lawyers out there who are advising clients, know that they're gonna remember words that you say. They're gonna misremember things that you tell them. So it is vitally important that if they ask you a question and you don't know, you don't have to say like, get the fuck out of here, I don't know. You can say like, I'll look into that for you, or I'm not sure because I don't focus on that area of law, but here's the name and number of an attorney that I believe could help answer your question. So I think in every business it's really important to swallow your pride and ask questions.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got the internet now. We can research stuff. We can buy books. We can go to the library like this one.
One of the tangents to that is, I think when you're a small business owner, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur, it is very lonely.
Yes.
So a lot of times, like having that network or that connection, or just a friend.
To vent.
Who can listen to you and help you, and sometimes it's literally just listening to you.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And my husband, I have to give him a lot of credit. He thinks I don't give him any credit. Anyways,
Chris, she does all the time. I gotta defend her on that one. I love you. She loves you. She always gives you a shout out.
But he was really helpful about really, especially in the early days of like, how do I do this? How do I how do I do everything?
Right.
I kind of had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
In terms of running the business, anyways.
Yeah.
And so I just think, and that's also partly why I try to reach out now to, I make the case more female entrepreneurs.
Yep.
I feel like you got to pick a specialty, so you just go with that group and you do it.
Help everyone.
So I would, of course, I would help anyone if they ask, but I feel like for women, there's just a few more things along the way that make it a little more difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I try to, when I see an opportunity to give some helpful advice. Sometimes it might not be warranted, but ideally, I do it in a way that's very nice. And just
joining me on this podcast is very nice, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because I think, at least, that it is going to help alleviate a lot of people's concerns, or maybe reassure them, or give them a little bit more confidence and to reach out to people with more knowledge or experience, because that's kind of what life's about, right? It's kind of sucking dry every ounce of knowledge and past experience, like you learned so quickly and knew by the 6th grade. Like, history repeats itself, so you better learn from others' mistakes before you make the same exact ones. You don't need to reinvent the wheel either.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. One of my biggest mentors and helps starting out was John Grasso. Hey Grasso. And he made a deal. He was like, I will sublet your office space for you, and you can pay me back in hours that you work for me. And if you can make the rent 1 month, you don't have to work for me at all.
Nice. That's
but
a good deal.
if you don't, right?
Yeah, that's
super
great.
Helpful.
Yeah.
And then he set me up with all the people that helped him start his practice. He always gave me advice. He gave me templates for like engagement letters to sign a contract with the client for representation. He was so helpful, and I'm so indebted to him. And I did also try to, kind of give advice to any young law students. I would give talks at the school, and I would take on unpaid interns, but I didn't really ask them for any work. I just actually, it was more of them observing my practice, and I would teach them what I was doing so that they would understand, because in law schools they never really have like a business class.
Oh, yeah, I feel like most schools, it's
yeah.
the one piece, and like that'll make or break you, is
You know how to-
understanding some fundamentals of business.
You know how to think like a lawyer, but you don't know how to run your own firm. You don't know where to buy your staples from. You don't know how to keep your accounting, check your mileage, all that stuff. So, you know, I think that's a wonderful philosophy that you're doing, and I think that every person out there who might be listening who has some experience in anything should be trying to, you know, like you've said multiple times, pay it forward to others, because we've all been there. And you would like to think that if you were ever in need of something, that there would be someone out there who's going to help you out. And so, and I can name countless number of times when people have in my life, as you already have stated in yours. And I think keeping that perspective in mind and knowing that as we go through life, whatever experiences that we've learned that can be teachable moments. That's actually exactly why I wrote my book, is because, excuse me, I want both my successes as well as my complete failures to be teachable moments for others. And if I can help one person, one young diabetic, not neglect their diabetes and risk themselves of going blind, I feel like I've done my part, you know? So I want to try and pay it forward in my own way, and I feel like everyone out there can figure out their own way of paying it forward to others. And on your part, I'm so honored that you joined me in this podcast, and we're gonna cut this off and then continue to ramble on to each other for a couple more hours.
We have one more point.
Ooh, please, yes.
So the last point is, I thought we should end with a success.
Excellent. Yes. Please go first.
So for me, my success is from clients' reactions. So maybe it's a little bit of validation as well, but I really get personal joy and like overwhelming like warmth from when I give clients images that I feel like I've worked so hard on for them. Like I want them to love this. So when I get reactions where they're like overjoyed and enthusiastic, then I know like I've produced something that was meaningful to you and not just that set of pretty pictures.
Right.
So I would say like that's my big success.
Some of your pictures, like I don't even know these people, and just the composition of them, I want them hanging up in my home. But no, I think that's a wonderful success, and I similarly feel like my greatest success stories were not so much any kind of publicity or major case, quote unquote, win. People in criminal defense don't tend to win much, so it's the small victories. But, you know, for me, it was always that feedback from the clients that I made a difference in their lives. And that's
amazing.
Like you said, almost a bit of validation. And that's something in college that my philosophy teacher told us. She was like, no one does anything in this life for no reason. Like, you're gonna have some sort of beneficial reason for doing anything in this life. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what if you volunteer? What if you do Habitat for Humanity? And she's like, well, you feel good when you do it, don't you? And I'm like, son of a bitch. Why are you so deep and right? But yes, so anywho, she was saying that you always get something when you do any kind of act. And to me, like, I found out I was almost like addicted to the validation and the gratitude that I received from my clients. Like, I fed off of that. The ones that were the greatest successes were like, hey, my sex crime wasn't supposed to be listed anymore. I committed a sex crime against an adult, and that had a registration period of, 20 years, and they're claiming that mine was against a child and that I have lifetime registration, and so now I'm in jail for a new crime. And one of my cellmates' girlfriend brought in the flyer that showed that I was a child molester, and now they've distributed around the jail, and I'm afraid for my safety.
Oh my God.
And so I, worked on his behalf to find the records from like, I think the 70s maybe, in the courthouse, and they were sealed off and almost non-existent. And I worked for a few months to contact the sex offender board in Massachusetts and get him off the registry once they acknowledged that they had made it, it was a mistake, it was an error, but it was a huge error. Men in prison see a child molester a little bit differently than they see a rapist. And that you can be in great physical danger in prison and in jail if you're seen as a quote-unquote kitty diddler. So just that small act of getting him off the registry, he would call me like once a year, just update me on how he's doing, that he's doing well. I've had another client say, hey, I'm now a mentor for others. I got visitation back with my daughter. I am a deacon in my church. I remarried, and those kind of success stories, and for them to tell me that my efforts were part of the reason for their rehabilitation or having a more law-abiding, productive, happy life, and aren't just defined by their grave mistakes in life, are the biggest successes I could have ever asked for.
That's amazing.
It's what I miss most, honestly, about practicing. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's a good positive.
So I feel like we both
ran the gamut.
we definitely ran the gamut, and I'm sorry for dragging it all out with you, but I just love talking to you because you're a great conversationalist, whether you like to admit it or not. So just accept that compliment.
Thank you very much.
Believe
you are too, Kate.
Oh, why? Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It's been such a delight to have you join me, and hopefully I can have you back.
Yeah.
And we can get more into these discussions on mental health.
I think we hit on a lot of topics.
Yeah, we can totally. I think I might wrangle your free weekends.
Awesome. Wow.
Chris, we might have to fight over those. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. And I want to remind the listeners that anyone returning back from being a Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate fan, that the podcast is now Hear Me Roar with Kate Itassi. And the website is hearmeroarpodcast.com. You can find it on Instagram at Hear Me Roar Podcast, Twitter at Hear Me Roar Pod, because I guess it was too long to do podcast. There's a Facebook page, a YouTube page, a Google Plus page, and while the old episodes of Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate are still available on iTunes and Google Play, I'm going to be working on getting this new version of the podcast up on both platforms as well for you to subscribe to. In the meantime, you can check it out on the website, which I'm sure you will have found through one of my various social media links. So I want to thank Angie again for joining me. It's been a pure delight, and I hope you all have enjoyed our discussions. And so if you have any questions or feedback or suggestions for new upcoming episodes, please reach out to me. You can reach out via any of those social media platforms, through the website, or at hearmeroarpodcast@gmail.com. So thanks again for joining, and till next time, my friends.